that time again, that time when we step into the virtual bar and meet up with Courtney Haviken from Ascent Counseling and discuss mental health in the church in this second of a part 2 series. I'm joined by Pastors Greg and Ken, and I'm your host, Christopher Antone, and this is 3 pastors stumble into a bar.
And we stumble out, don't we?
It could be either way with us. You never know. Stumble in, stumble out. You know, depends on if it's Monday or not.
Yeah.
After any given Sunday, it's definitely stumble in. That's for sure. Although we've had some good Sundays here lately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Yesterday I wasn't here.
That's why it was so good. Oh, me.
And
I knew there was a reason.
Way down.
Yes.
Imagine that.
I knew there was a reason it was so good. So today we are here to discuss a subject that we had touched on back in November. Does this say 2021?
It does.
It's 2 years ago.
Seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
We've been doing this that long?
Oh, much longer.
Oh.
You're kidding. How long have we been doing this?
A little bit longer.
I don't know. I had hair when we started.
So you guys were doing it before I came along then.
We were all well adjusted.
Yes.
This was like 20 years ago then,
We've
obviously.
been drinking for a long time.
Virtual drink.
We need to get out of the bar, guys.
I know.
This is getting a little ridiculous. Wow, 2021.
Speaking of fasting.
That's funny. Yeah, that was an interesting topic. An enthralling topic. I could tell like everybody was itching to learn more about the topic of fasting.
Yes.
I looked out in the congregation as I was preaching and everybody was just rapt with attention.
That's called sleeping.
Well, you know, I can call it what I want.
Yeah.
I can identify as it being interesting. Let's see. So 2021, in our episode titled Mental Health in the Church, we talked with Dr. Robert Hope, wasn't it?
Hoppy.
Hoppy? Mm-hmm. What is it with people in these names?
They don't.
That was a great conversation.
They don't get them.
Yeah. He's a licensed psychologist, cognitive behavioral therapist, and professor of psychology at Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, Minnesota. We discussed some of the results of the 2021 NAMI Mood Disorder Survey, the National Alliance of Mental Health and Illness. We've had them here before to do some talks. They do some pretty good work around here. Is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. They claim that 1 in 5 Americans live with a mental health issue. In a church our size, that equates to 40 to 50 of our brothers and sisters in Christ. You probably know some of them, but don't realize their struggle. I'm going to try and resist sarcastic comments for the rest of this show.
Probably be wise.
Really?
Because, like, everything that I just read there, like, my mind was just reeling with
good.
certain people that I could comment on.
Certain people came to mind.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
big difference between biblical counseling and licensed professional counseling.
Yeah.
The code of ethics. We are not able to talk about
Ethics?
people we know. Yeah.
Ethics.
Ethics and
No,
counseling.
ethics.
What's that?
That's a whole nother show.
I know.
I don't even think I've ever heard of that. Let's see. We talked about quality of life issues such as worry, fear, strained relationships, treatments and their costs, practical support services and relationships, general perceptions about mood disorders, effects of the pandemic, principal causes of stigma in faith communities. So to continue that discussion, we have asked our guest Courtney to come along today. She's a licensed master social worker with Ascent Counseling, a faith-based counseling agency in Coeur d'Alene. There's a link we'll provide on our website below this podcast in the episode description. She's a graduate of the University of North Texas, where she received her BA in sociology. She went on to earn her Master's of Social Work with an emphasis on behavioral health from California State University, San Marcos. Courtney has worked in the field of counseling since 2017 in long-term and short-term residential treatment centers, partial hospitalization programs, and intensive outpatient programs. She's a strong Christian, has served in leadership roles within her church. So, Courtney, thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. Does that about sum it up for you? Like, tell us a little bit more about yourself. It's got to be something really awesome.
It got everything.
No?
It's just like, wow, how comprehensive.
Why?
Yeah.
Why would you choose this
Field?
profession? Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. Because I struggled, and it took me a really long time to be able to stabilize. And I didn't think I'd be talking about that today, but I'm good talking about it because I think that speaks to stigma, which is a big problem amongst believers that have mental health disorders. But it took me a long time to stabilize, and I knew at a really early age. I remember sitting on my therapist's couch. I think I was 16, and they're like, "What do you want to do when you're older, Courtney?" And I said, "I want to do what you do. I want to do this." And they said, "You need to get your LCSW. That's the future of mental health." And I'm like, okay. So, 15 years later, I finally was able to pull it together. And I was a single mom in college in my early 20s, and finally was able to go back and go for that LCSW.
Which is?
Licensed clinical social worker. So I'm on my way. So I have some of the hours towards that. I have the license that lets me practice doing what I'm doing. But to get the LCSW, I have to earn some more hours.
Okay.
But to be able to help people when you've been helped in a myriad of ways, it feels like a ministry and a calling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think anytime that you are called to do something and you're in the service of other people, that's the definition of ministry, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. So, I would say that's a fair assumption.
Do you think that's this type of counseling is inherent in some people? Or is there people that you have seen in your process of going through what you're going through realize if you don't have that quote unquote gift, it's probably not a good field for you?
Is that a dig on me?
He wasn't even looking at you. It wasn't. He was looking at him.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
I feel like that was big of me.
You know what I'm saying, right?
It's a good question. Valid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember having people I was in grad school with that knew really quickly they didn't want to do the clinical part. They're like, no, not for me.
Yeah.
Too much people, too many people. I don't know though. I some people I think have the gift, but I think so many things can be learned if you have the heart for something, the intent for it, and the willingness. I think you can learn almost anything. Maybe not anything, but yeah.
This is an interesting discussion because we've learned this over time, and it's one of the things that's weirdly unfair to pastors, and something probably pastors should be thinking about, because there is an assumption that because you take over a pastoral role, that somehow you're a good counselor automatically.
Yeah.
And by personal experience, I know that not to be true. And then also by example that I have seen, I know that to not be true. That there is a gifting, I think, and I'm not exactly sure how to describe that biblically. I don't know if you could make a biblical argument for it. But you're right. For me, it's too much peopling. It gets a little extreme, and then you get short with people and you get frustrated, and then they're like, and then if they come back like they're not doing what you ask them to do,
Oh yeah.
it's like I have no patience for that. Greg's so much better at it than I am. He's just got the patience of a saint, and I just can't do it. I'm just like, why are you? I told you what to do last time. Why didn't you just do it? I mean, I don't understand what's going on here.
But in your defense, the one thing that I always appreciate is your discernment. You do have a very discerning spirit that when somebody comes in, sits down in your office, whether it's a single or a couple, and you say, this is it, 99 times out of 100, you've got them pegged. I mean, I can't count the number of times I've come to you and said, hey, this is what's going on. I said, well, they're this way or they're that way or this will never work or something like that. And I'm like, no,
It's because
I'm
I'm
going to
jaded,
work on
Greg.
it. Well, you're jaded, but you're correct in many cases.
And you
so that's
own it.
Well,
You own
yeah.
your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
How cool is that? I really appreciate somebody that's like, look, this isn't my gig.
yeah.
This isn't where I'm gifted or called.
Yeah, I wish more pastors could do that. Unfortunately, a lot of pastors or congregations won't allow them to do that.
Oh.
They're expected to be the
Everything pastor.
they're expected to be the scholar that stands up on stage and leads them through lectures. They're expected to be the evangelist that goes out and evangelizes. They're expected to be the counselor that can sit down and listen to your problems and be able to help you walk through them. They're expected to
the
be
deacon that goes to the hospital.
Yeah, they're expected to be way too much.
Jeez. That's a lot.
And so there's no wonder that the turnover for pastors typically is 5 years. I've been here for 14, and I'm convinced that that's because this amazing congregation allows me to be the person that I am, as opposed to trying to force me into being someone that I'm not. And that's like for all of us, but our pastoral staff has been assembled in such a way that we compensate for each other's weaknesses on purpose, intentionally. So it works out. But
Out of all four of us, you might get one good pastor.
if you put all of us together, you'd have the ideal pastor.
And many Jesus.
We can do it all.
Yeah.
Well, that's grace. I love that you guys give each other that, and you pick up this not slack, but you, in a way, you see where the need is, and the one that has the strength steps in, and it just keeps going. I think that sets the pace for the whole congregation to have the ability to go, oh, maybe I'm not made for this, or maybe I am made for this. You give people permission to be themselves.
Yeah, and permission to not get everything right,
Yeah.
because you're not going to get everything right. You're going to get some things wrong. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things, and the reason I bring that up is because I wonder if that's potentially part of the problem of mental health as in the church. As you know, I've been thinking about mental health, and we've been really trying to develop kind of a comprehensive program here to kind of help with mental health. It's not apparent where you start to begin to work on that, because the problems are pretty deep. I mean, not only do you have the stigma, but you have a lot of people that are put into a position where they're expected to be counselors where they probably shouldn't. And you have people that are expecting to be counseled in a certain way that they're not going to be. And so it's a massive problem that, you know, I'm lost as to where to begin with it. Other than just, you know, it's kind of like eat the elephant one bite at a time. You know, I mean, I don't really know what else to do.
We have a young woman that is stepping up, is going to be taking over the counseling program that we have here. And her attitude is everybody in the church is a counselor to some degree. So the lay counseling would be everybody. You start off with everybody, and then you start weeding it down to those that are capable, that have a gift, that have a desire.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah. And so you just bring everybody in, and, you know, she's got a lot of information to back that up, scriptures and whatnot. So, but that we are at the bottom of the staircase on that one. We've just started that.
In kind of a colloquial way, that kind of makes sense, because we're supposed to confess our faults to one another. It does start with your kind of closest relationships, if you can get there. But like you were saying, you know, like with the stigma involved, you know, like not a lot of people talk about any mental health issues that they struggle with, because there is a large contingency of Christianity that would tell you that you have mental health issues because you have sin in your life.
Yep.
Or you, you know, this is you having some failure in your life that you're incapable of dealing with because you're not spiritually strong enough, or some other such nonsense as that.
That's an interesting point. Courtney, do you think that people that have a mental issue, behavioral issue like that, look at it as sin and thus don't seek help?
Definitely. I've been shocked by when I moved here to North Idaho, the people that I have, because we're a faith-based agency. I can honestly tell you probably all of them come in with some fear that it's something that they're doing or not doing and that they really shouldn't be there or don't have a right to be there. They should be a stronger believer. They shouldn't be, sinning as much as they sin. Like somehow it's inherently sinful to have something going on in their mind and their heart that they cannot pull themselves up by their bootstraps and conquer with prayer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is really hard to break that.
That's the first barrier, right?
Yes, definitely.
How do you overcome that?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
I'm not
I
jumping
think,
forward too far, am I?
well, and
What else is new?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I gotta ask.
I love you. I love how you just go with it. I think how I deal with it is I try to have some empathy and compassion for why they would feel that way, because I think it makes sense. I think a lot of times, and if you think about someone that has a mental health disorder, the way they process information is probably not always going to be very clear because they're muddled. Their head is muddled. So I like to be able to meet them where they're at and just recognize that it is easy to get that message, whether they're actually getting that message or they're just thinking that message. They're taking that in. And it's also complicated because they bring their own past and trauma into it. So we can hear something that is from the Bible and it be meaning one thing, and we can twist it and start hearing something else. So I don't like to always assume that it's somebody telling them that. Sometimes we tell ourselves that.
That's a good point.
Regardless, I want to just let them know you're in good company. There's no judgment. And let's unpack this a little. Let's unpack this. Let's look at, what do you believe? What do you believe about God? What do you believe about yourself? And, when did some of these problems start? And when we start doing that, I think it starts becoming apparent that we can start connecting things.
Now, when you say mental disorders, I mean, I know that there is a truckload of them, but what are would you say are the top 10 that you deal with on a regular basis?
If you had asked me at my last position, I could probably give you 10, but it's really condensed, at least with the population that I'm seeing now that aren't severe and persistent mental health issues. Really, people that are able to function tend to come in for depression and anxiety. I will also see some obsessive compulsive disorder. I'll see sometimes some personality disorders here and there, not a lot. Those are persistent maladaptive behaviors and ways of thinking that affect your relationships, your perception of yourself. Those are really, it's hard for people to function.
What would be an example of a personality disorder?
Personality disorder would be like borderline personality disorder. Somebody that has extreme emotion dysregulation. They can't seem to regulate their moods. They can be, on top of the world 1 minute of the day and down in the dumps the next. The cycling is super fast. Whereas if you have someone that has a bipolar disorder, that's going to last longer. You're going to see someone in that state for, it could be a month of one and then another. But personality disorders tend to just be chaos. And they can't hold relationships with pretty much anyone, or they're very rocky, a very unstable sense of self. Kind of when you're meeting with them, it's like, whoa, I don't even know where to start. Whereas when someone comes in for depression, if you talk to them, it's clear that there's just a lower interest in things that they used to find, motivating. They're not sleeping, they're not eating. Just everything is really down. And with anxiety, you see someone that's just really struggling to catch breath sometimes. Their thoughts are racing. They're constantly worried. They're a little more, you can see them kind of a little bit more for what they are. But when you say 10, I guess, it's like I said, I think I would have a hard time even reaching that.
So you're thinking 5.
Yeah, ADHD. I see a lot of ADHD. I see a lot of trauma, but you don't always, and I'm not one of those, you guys, I'm not one of those therapists that see someone and think diagnoses. I don't think of people as a diagnosis. I mean, we're unfortunately dealing with insurance companies, and they want to have a diagnosis, but sometimes there is an exact diagnosis. Not everyone falls in a perfect little box, and we know as believers we are not our diagnoses.
Right.
We have a diagnosis, but I would say so depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD. And obsessive compulsive disorder. I probably see that those are the top 5 in the practice I'm in now.
Yeah. And a lot of those that you are talking about, depression, anxiety, ADHD, particularly ADHD, I think there is an attack from Christian circles to completely dismiss that as a legitimate disorder. In fact, I was watching a lecture by a gentleman on YouTube here just recently who is a pastor of some renown. He's not super popular, but he does get around and he talks a lot about mental health. And he was talking about how ADHD was a created diagnosis for the sole purpose of selling Adderall. That was what the whole point of that whole thing was. And we tend to get a lot of that kind of conspiracy related stuff in our community. What would you say to a person that is hearing that kind of thing? That's maybe not even necessarily like suffering from that, but they're hearing this and they're trying to figure out, well, is this a real thing or is this not a real thing? I mean, how do you reach a person like that?
I would do your research. Is that what you're asking? What I would say to look at. So here's the thing: anyone that hears that could possibly have an influence on somebody that actually has this disorder. Because we all, we take in information and then we decide if it's true for us. And if we are all carrying around this belief that ADHD is a created thing, and then lo and behold, someone comes along that has ADHD. And yes, some people were misdiagnosed with ADHD, just like anything, but it is very much a real thing. It causes a lot of disruption in the life of somebody that has it. But so just checking what you believe in and recognizing that can just one comment, or sharing that belief with someone that has it could be super destructive, because that person might just be coming to realize, hey, I think there's something different about me. And maybe getting some of the guts to be able to discuss it, and then they get slammed with that. That feels like judgment.
Yeah,
and that's just so. And until you really walk in someone's shoes, who are we to say what symptoms feel like or what symptoms are real or not? We're not until we're sitting there. I mean, even as a therapist, like I don't create these diagnoses. Like I would be careful to make any kind of judgment like that. Not in this particular situation. I can make a judgment on this particular situation if I meet someone. But in general, I think we should be very careful of accepting information until we really do the research on it and looking at multiple reputable sources.
Yeah. It seems like there's such a disdain for pharmaceuticals that, we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater almost.
Yes.
Instead of just trying to help people. And obviously, medication is not the end of trying to help someone, treat them through some type of an issue or situation. But there's times where people absolutely have to have that leg up to get started even.
Oh, yeah.
So, I appreciate what you're saying. You really need to have compassion for people and just not assume that your doctor's out to get you. I've had some experiences with my doctors, and I've had some mental health stuff that I have dealt with over the past. I mean, I've been pastoring for 25 years, so it's a miracle that I'm not in a psych ward. But
maybe you are.
There's a possibility.
Shelter Island.
Maybe this is all just part of it.
No, as Ken said, the walls are padded.
What was that Leonardo DiCaprio movie where he went
Shelter
to the
Island.
Yes, yeah, Shutter Island. Yeah.
Oh, Shutter Island.
Shutter
yes,
Island.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I might be living that, right? But
Or this is all a simulation.
yeah. But I think if you feel like you're if you feel like you're suffering from something, you're not sure what it is, talking to someone for sure is a good start. But go to your doctor too. Go to your general practicing doctor. Most of them are very aware of these issues. And when I went to my doctor, one of the things that he asked me, or he wanted to do, was to walk into treatment very slowly with cognitive behavioral therapist and with medication. If we're going to start any kind of medication, let's start really low and see if it's even required. And then if it doesn't look like it's helping, then let's readdress it. They were very cautious about getting into any kind of pharmaceuticals, which I think is going to be the case with most doctors. I think one of the things that has happened since COVID is people have this misconception that every time a doctor prescribes some kind of medication, that they're getting some kind of kickback from the pharmaceutical companies or something. And that's actually not happening. They're not getting paid per pill that they prescribe. They may get stuff if they promote that particular medication. Mm-hmm. They might get a golf trip, or they might get, whatever. But I have not met a doctor that's just out to get people.
True.
But, it takes a little bit of common sense, and it's frightening to me that we have so many people that are so apt to just reject wholesale the possibility that someone is suffering from something just because you dislike X, Y, or Z.
It's encouraging to hear you say that, because it's been a burden on my heart. And I worry for the minors, mm-hmm. Of the parents that feel that way and that are so quick to just shut anything down that they don't understand. And then just all the suffering adults, that it doesn't have to be, it can be better. It doesn't have to be that miserable. We can help. Let's do something about this. I'll tell my clients too, you have agency. If you're taking something or you're doing something and it doesn't feel right to you, you don't have to. There's nothing, you don't have to, nothing's set in stone. Mm-hmm. So, and continuing to reinforce that. Go ahead. Sorry. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, do you see kind of a correlation? Our society, our culture is getting more and more polarized. There's a lot more aggression and just all the turmoil that's going on in our culture. You're also seeing, it sounds like, a definite rise in depression and anxiety mm-hmm. that could be partly due to that. You turn up the heat, something's going to boil.
True.
Do you also see an extending correlation then between guilt and the depression and anxiety?
That's a great question. Yes.
Does the depression and anxiety actually instigate or exacerbate the guilt that people are feeling over why they're feeling that way? And it's kind of a giant pressure cooker system.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, even depression in and of itself, guilt is a marker of depression. So you already then to have those underlying feelings of guilt that could be, growing because of the beliefs of themselves or people around them, to not, I see it the most kind of that narrative of, I should be able to do this. I should have control over my mind. I should have the joy of the Lord. I should blah, 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 blah. But yes, and yes. And that is a big part of the first thing that we start doing is dismantling some of that guilt.
Where do you think that guilt comes from?
Childhood trauma.
Yeah.
For a lot of my clients, it does come from childhood trauma. I know that's cliche, but it really, really, and I don't like cliches, but a lot of internal, the way we talk to ourselves has to do with how we learn to talk to ourselves. Also, I think it has to do with culture and kind of who we're surrounding ourselves with. And unfortunately, being in the church, you have a lot of people that can struggle with guilt. I don't think it has to be that way at all. We could live very free. We have the good news. We don't have to be under guilt.
It's interesting that people feel that way, though, because I do know that 50 years ago, 40 years ago, even, churches were very apt to park on guilt, and to kind of try to make people feel guilty to get them to come down the aisle or, whatever. But I don't know of any churches that we associate with that preach messages of guilt anymore. So do you think it's like a residue of the past, or like, where's this coming from?
I honestly partly think it's the area. Living in different parts of the country, North Idaho is probably one of the most individualistic. You do it yourself. You don't need help. There is a mentality here. And I don't know many adults that don't have some guilt if they have to ask for help. And that's so I think it's part of your guys' culture as an area. But I love this area and I love the people. But I have noticed there's some of that. Anytime you have a culture that puts a lot of pressure on being able to solve your own problems and not, in every way, I think that's what can happen when you need help.
Are you speaking primarily inside the church on that, or outside?
Just
or
everything.
Just in general? Just
the area. I think it's living in different areas. I think some of the highest levels of guilt of individuals up here than I've seen anywhere. That now I'm around disproportionate amount of people that need help. So, I'm seeing that. But even just in general, I think there is that mentality of this is rugged, strong, taking care of what needs to be taken care of. That is at least my perception of the area. But I hear you. I don't necessarily in church. I don't hear the message of guilt in the church I go to. But I also don't know all the churches around here. And I think when you have an area that, like I said, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that is kind of holds some of those principles that I just shared. I think it can be easy and doesn't believe in modern medicine as much and not wanting to take anything from doctors or the government. I mean, that's a breeding ground. If you suddenly you lose the ability to function as you once did, I mean, that's going to be one of the very first emotions that's going to pop up.
Yeah.
That would seem to describe just about any fairly remote rural area.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because you just practically, as a matter of doing life, rely on yourself to get it done because you just don't have all of those resources and systems in place. Whereas an urban environment, you've got everything around you, and you're really not expected to do quite as much.
Especially in an area where we open carry.
That could be, but I do think
because you've probably seen some of that in Florida, and I'm thinking of Montana, and I'm thinking of other parts of the country where I've met very kindred spirits in that way.
The difference in Florida and the difference in the South is that they're very much family oriented.
Yeah.
Like blood is thicker than anything in Florida. It doesn't even matter if your, second cousin is an absolute wretch felon. You still take care of your family. That's the way that it is. Like it
must be more multi-generational and extended family than say here in the Northwest where it's more immediate family.
Yeah, it's families are large. And my family is an old Pensacola family. And we have lots of relatives there, extended relatives. My mom has a myriad of sisters, five, and my dad had a lot of brothers and sisters, and all of the cousins and all of the uncles and aunts and all of those people. We may hate each other's guts. But if something were to happen, everybody would descend to take care of that situation. That's just the way it is in the South. So you're right. There's something very unique in this area as far as the individualism is concerned. It's individualism almost too much. The rugged individualism is romantic until you're in the prairie and you've got a broke leg and you're dying. It's like, that's not such a romantic thought.
Yes. Yeah.
Or your teenager is suffering from depression.
Exactly. And that's the analogy that you
All
kind
your
of
relatives can't help you if you don't say something.
Or in this case, in today's society, you have a teen girl that's suffering from gender dysphoria, and you're sending her to public school, and your guidance counselors are demanding that, she embrace this instead of trying to work through the thing that like most teenagers deal with. And so, it doesn't, the individualism doesn't help in those kind of situations.
Yeah. And being from Texas and Tennessee, I would ditto what you said. It's different. There's a togetherness. I don't know. The South has, even though there's similar beliefs.
Yeah. Even communities, even like towns. Yeah.
And I don't want to knock, and I think the weather too, we're not only rural, it gets cold. Like people really do have to do things on their own. But I have to say, like, I think some of the greatest hearts and love for God and love for each other. And I love the people here. So it doesn't have to be that way. I wish we could, carry a message around. That is my hope. I would love to, and I don't even know schools. Yes, you could go and speak in schools, but not just the schools, the adults, like the adults whose generations of generations are not used to doing that, not used to asking for help or saying when something's off. They need it too.
Yeah. How long you been in the area?
Only a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
You like it so far?
I do. It's hard to get connected.
Yeah.
It's hard to feel. I do though, because when I have, but it took a good, oh my gosh, usually within 6 months I can start really connecting, and it's a year and a half, and I have a couple good friends, which is great. But it's slow going, and probably one of the most slowest of anywhere I've lived, which is interesting.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah.
But again, no knocking. This is wonderful, beautiful.
Yeah. You're married.
I am.
Kids?
Yes.
Okay. So there's an inroad right there, right, with the kids.
True.
Are they publicly schooled?
No,
Privately?
they're not, and they're privately. They're just starting. So they're little. So we have one that just turned 4 yesterday, a daughter, and a daughter who is 5. They just started going to Christian Summit Academy, which we love. And I actually have a 19-year-old son who's at Boise State.
Cool.
Yeah.
Boise State.
Boise State.
Well,
Nice.
You made it to the right state.
Yes, he did.
But
out of the last state, which is an improvement.
So he's a Smurf then, huh?
He is a Smurf.
Yeah.
He is.
Don't they have that? Don't they have a blue field?
Yeah.
They do.
They have a blue field. Yeah. In Eastern
That's the
Washington
Smurf.
is the one with the red field, right?
Yep. Eagles.
Yeah. That's just weird. There's probably some mental health issues with the people that designed that field.
Obviously.
Yeah.
That's what I think. First
Maybe
thing I think
we can
of.
help them.
So,
Go speak to them.
you guys, Ascent Counseling is a Christian parachurch ministry.
It is.
And so you guys deal mostly with believers. Is there a percentage of people that are not believers that you deal with, or is it just pretty much primarily believers?
I'd probably say 95%.
Okay,
of
so
people are believers.
there is a percentage of people that are not believers that
There
are.
are.
Okay.
There are, yeah.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I like, I think there are some definite differences in working at a faith-based counseling center as opposed to being like a biblical counselor. And I think one of them is when we have people that aren't of faith come in, it's not like an opportunity to evangelize or something like that, because you really can't do that as our code of ethics. And we got to meet them where they're at. But that can open some rich dialogue, and letting them share where they're at, and we share what we believe. And yeah, but I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
No,
Go
you're
ahead.
fine. You're fine. No, you say whatever you need to say. One of the things that we do here is we ask people to submit questions, and if we use it in the podcast, then they get a 3P coffee mug.
Nice.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah,
stuff.
I take that.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff. In fact, we had the last one show that we had. The guy came yesterday and he had his 3P coffee mug and was showing it off to everybody.
Nice.
Was he showing it off?
Yeah,
Is he proud?
he was walking around like this.
Look what I got.
Cheers, cheers. But one of the questions that someone asked me, and I'm really trying to figure out what this question is really all about. I'm not really fully understanding it, but the question is do you use Enneagrams in your practice? And how do you reconcile it with the sovereignty of God and his unique purpose for each individual? Now, let's start off with, how does an Enneagram conflict with the sovereignty of God? That would be my first question.
Is this for a question for me?
Yeah.
So it's funny, I'm the one that's answering, because I wouldn't have even known about these Enneagram until my last position, and they used it. That was like their basis. And it was kind of interesting to me because it's a personality test.
Right.
It's like a Myers-Briggs, and they assign you a number, and it assesses all of your weaknesses and strengths, but it does it in so that it takes into consideration, this is just a personality test. It's going to look different for each person. So I don't know if it doesn't claim to predict anything. It uses what information you give it to be able to kind of, I don't know, categorize some behaviors and some things that could be helpful. So I don't know, just off at face value, if they're mutually exclusive. But here's the thing, if you're going to the Enneagram to solve your problems or to figure yourself out more than you're going to God or you're going to the Word, I think then you have a little bit of a problem, because you're right in that God's sovereignty. God made us. He knows every little fiber of our beings, more than that thing is going to know. Not only that, he knows the future.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's whatever you use the most becomes kind of what you're elevating. So if you're using it just because you find it somewhat informational, how it also will look at kind of by number, and that sounds like numerology. It's not numerology. And there's actually a good amount of backing with that, some evidence in just how they got all their information. But if you're using it to inform kind of your growth psychologically, okay. But like, how often are you using it? And are you obsessed? Because I know people that are obsessed with it and want to know your number right away.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's idolizing it, and that's putting a different place in place of importance.
Yeah, it seems to me like a lot of organizations, Christian organizations even, one of the ones that I'm looking at right now that I'm kind of going through just to kind of see what it's like. I mean, I don't plan on ever counseling anybody through it, but it's interesting to see how they approach it. And they use a personality test that they have built. And it's really popular and famous. It's been around for a very long time. But they use traits like melancholy, sanguine, those types of things. And so in the way that my head works, I'm listening to this guy talk about these things, and I immediately start asking, what do these terms even mean? Where did they come from? What's their origins? What's their etymology? And so I started researching. It turns out that the ancient Greeks used to trace your personality to your bodily fluids, and they received their name from these bodily fluids that they said your personality was derived from. And so that's where these terms come from. And I thought that was pretty funny because, we're trying to assign, personality traits to people on stuff that the ancient Greeks used to think were, I'm just going to put some more blood in you and then you're going to be less sanguine than you are now. And so I wonder if, like you're saying, like if people just think about these personality tests too much, like they put too much into them or they don't put enough into them. And they don't realize that it's just a tool. Yeah. It's just a thing. It's like if I had a theological equivalent, probably like a spiritual gifts test would be kind of the same.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Which can be, I've seen people elevate too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen people build their ministries around them.
I've full churches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. Ken made us do one not too long ago. I mean, it didn't turn out. I don't think I was surprised by how it turned out. I'm never surprised by how these things turn out. But I will say this, that personality test that I took with this organization, when you read through the personality kind of qualifiers, like the traits, and then they begin to tell you how these things impact your life, and their approach kind of is, this is kind of the person that God has made you. This is who you are. You can change behavior, but you can't change personality, is what their kind of approach is. Which, agree or don't agree. That may be true. I'm not sure that you can change personality. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. You don't agree? Tell me.
No. I was going to go with an example.
I love it.
Of at one point in my life, I really wanted to work for Costco, and I would see the people that were in there, and I would think to myself, I could do a better job than that, or I'm more cordial than that. I'm, more outgoing than that. And so when I took the test, quote unquote, to get a job at Costco, it was like 100 questions.
Yeah.
And it was
exhausting.
repeating itself. Well, I already answered this one. What are they doing? And I didn't get the job. And I was really shocked.
And I would say
Why would you hire me?
I would say that speaks to your personality, being frustrated with the test.
You think well, that's the kind of what you were saying. Does it show through? Can you ask enough questions and then they evaluate that?
So the first one that they sent me, it was like 15 questions, just to kind of get a baseline. It was way off. I was like, this does not describe me at all. I don't even know who you're talking about. She's like, well, let me send you the full test. And so it was like 100 questions. And I sat through the dang thing and, same thing, it's like, oh, well, you've asked me this question 12 times.
Yes.
Okay. I mean,
What
answer
are you looking for?
Can we get done with this? So finally got through it all. And she emails me back the results and I read through this thing. And at first I'm like, this is stupid, but then I realize, wow, yeah, they pretty much nailed me, like right on.
Which is scary. It always feels
It's
invasive a little
weird.
bit.
It's weird feeling, when you read through it, because your first instinct is, this is stupid. Nah, this. But then if you're honest with yourself, you're like, well, yeah, I am kind of like that,
That they can reduce your whole personality, your experience, and your history down to a base of suppositions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm like you. I mean, I don't necessarily feel like it's a replacement for the sovereignty of God. I would be curious as to find out how you come to the conclusion that it is an invasion of the sovereignty of God, just because it's a test. Because
I think there are dangers. So I think I would say if you we're all suggestive. And if you tell me you're melancholy, well, I bet I'm going to start probably acting more melancholy if I think I'm melancholy. Will it change my personality? No, but it's suggestive. And I think we pigeonhole ourselves. And if we focus on it enough, we can really take on some of those. And maybe people are thinking like that maybe that's what they're saying. But I get it. It is kind of like my first instinct when I saw it was, what's this? Like my last job.
Yeah.
Why are we using
what
this
kind
in
of
a place
astrology
of
is
work?
this?
Yeah. Exactly.
It kind of looks like a pentagram.
Yes,
It does.
yes.
Yeah.
And then the Enneagram, even the word, it doesn't. Yeah, but I had a friend who uses it, a Christian therapist who uses it, like is a big part of her work. She would have been probably better to talk to.
Yeah. There's a saying out there that says, you are what people think you are. That's kind of boils down to that, being, if you think about that, and you deal in that realm where you say, okay, yeah, if somebody says I'm melancholy, and then all of a sudden you're melancholy,
You
Very
are
codependent.
you are
what people think you are.
Yeah.
So that's saying they're an accurate mirror of who you are.
I mean, I've heard what some people have said about me. I don't know that I want to
Go there.
I don't know if
got
I
with the wrong
would
people.
accept that as true.
Good for you. Good for you.
Well, I get-
Internal boundaries.
Yeah. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make is that, do we fall into that category? Is that something that,
Some of us do.
yeah, where we are swayed by what other people think of us?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be back when I first started ministry, but after 25 years of dealing with Christians,
Yeah.
I listen to about 5% of what they say.
You're
pretty
so bad.
much.
You're tough
Yeah.
as nails now.
That's not necessarily a good thing, by the way, but it's you get to the point where you're just like, quit whining so much. Golly.
This is our
Go
loving
see-
pastor.
Go see Greg.
You feel the love.
Go see Greg.
Come to Athol Baptist
I wish I
Church.
could say that more.
And Greg will embrace them.
Yes, I'll give you a hug.
You were
I'll
down.
listen.
You were down in Chris's office, weren't you?
Yes.
No,
So I'm curious, you kind of hit on it kind of in passing, the whole gender dysphoria issue.
Mhm.
That's what our country is
I did wanna
obsessed
talk
with
about
right
that,
now. Are you seeing that in reality? Is that coming out in the work that you do, that it's as prevalent and pervasive as we are led to believe?
So I will say, not so where I'm at right now, we don't see that as much at our agency because that isn't something we specialize at our Christian agency. So we because we do deal with it a little differently than if you work at a secular. I will tell you, my last job, oh yeah, shocking. Young people, I would say almost more than half
Wow.
have it going on, and it was so hard to keep the pronouns straight. I would mess up all the time, and they would get upset, and it's just you're just going, what's going on? This generation is truly, it is like, at least with the teens that I was dealing with. And I don't see it with the adults. I see it with the teens and the younger the kids, for sure.
where do you suppose that's coming from?
I mean, I think that honestly, it's become such a hot topic and something to just say, well, this must be it. And it's spread like wildfire and it's popular. And so I think that if anything's going on, it's getting filtered into that way of identifying ourselves personally. It just doesn't make sense. How could this be suddenly such a huge issue and it happens to be coinciding with how much media attention and just how, as we know, there are certain things politically that are just popular and that are just, for the mainstream, that are like, yes, this is the big deal right now.
Yeah.
But so I think kids are hearing that and going, well, shoot, maybe that's me.
Yeah.
Did that seem to be the catch-all for any problems that they had? It's like, oh, well, that must be your gender. So we'll lump you in here, and this is your diagnosis and your prognosis and your treatment.
It honestly was so common. It was almost just like a given, like that they would have a different pronoun. And it wasn't even looked at as much as an identity disorder as it should be, if that makes sense. It was
They don't view it as a disorder.
So it was just like anything, just how you identify yourself. So we weren't even looking at what's underneath that, because the only time you would really address it, at least the place I worked at, is if they were really struggling with it. But if everyone's okay, I mean, if everyone is accepting of, there's no struggle, at least in their eyes.
So it's about the acceptance, not the disorder.
Correct.
Everybody bending to include and accept them.
Absolutely. And if you don't, if you don't get it right, you get, people can come down on you.
So you have a client that comes in, they've got an issue, and that issue isn't their gender, it's something else. But you just have to put a label on them as far as their gender.
You mean in terms of their, like, how they want
to identify? Yeah.
Yeah. So where I was working in a treatment center, people, the young people often had a lot of disorders that they would come in with, and we wouldn't really we wouldn't address the identity disorder unless it was something that was truly bothering them and they were having issues with it. It was just looked at as that's their pronouns. That's where they're identified right now.
But you,
right?
you knew and understood that that was probably part of the problem.
And you guys, can I tell you something quick? A story. This was not a family that were Christian. Just a wonderful family. And they had a child, another child who had an eating disorder. And that child was told that they needed to, get to a healthy weight, not to pay attention to the way they saw themselves, because it was dysmorphic disorder. But they had this other child who was like, no, I am this gender, even though that wasn't their gender. And they were sitting there going, we're scratching our heads here. We're not understanding. We have two that are having, it seems like, a similar identity issue. One we're supposed to ignore, and then the other we're supposed to focus on. I thought it was such an honest, good question.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I just encourage them to keep asking it.
That's people with some intellectual fortitude willing to ask some questions.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I appreciated that, but it was it wasn't where I was working now when I was getting that question, but I was still able to, work in who I am, and I encourage them to thought it was a very good point to keep asking it, and I hope they are. But most, I don't think, have that kind of fortitude.
Yeah, it's almost like they're just like they're asked to just accept whatever it is, no matter what, and it's almost like they're just wanting to just eliminate the gender dysphoria from the book completely, as if it just doesn't even exist. Like if you just think that you're not the gender that you are, that's part of a normal human behavior.
Correct.
That's kind of the goal, the end goal of it all. And that's a terrifying thought. Do you think that that the reason that you're not seeing a lot of that is because Christians just don't want to deal with it?
It's a good question. I think, as an agency, we don't specialize in that, and they might be looking at that when they're looking at what, we're doing and so maybe they might not bring them to us. We don't affirm. That's something is sent, we have the ability to do that as a private Christian agency. So we won't necessarily we're not going to be confrontational or combative, but we're not going to affirm. We're not going to call someone a male that's a female.
Well, you view it as a disorder.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we're not going to do that. But I think that honestly, I don't think that people are talking a lot about it when they're Christian. I think it's a huge, talk about stigma. I think there's a huge fear and concern there. And I think that's really unfortunate, because when I've talked to churches and they've asked me, how do you feel about this? Would you take clients? I'm like, absolutely, send them in. Why are we hiding from this? This is important. And they're struggling.
And a lot of these kids that are coming to church, they're going to public school and they're getting a guidance counselor that's telling them one thing, and then they're coming home and their parents are like, no, that's not really true. But, if you're getting bombarded, 8 hours a day at school with this gender ideology from one person or another, it may not even come directly from your staff or your administration or whatever. It may just come from the kids. Peer pressure is powerful. If you're dealing with that on a regular basis, you really should not hide from it. You should deal with it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's nothing good comes from hiding. It's just going to breed guilt and shame and fear and confusion. But I would also, encourage, there's a lot of people that are, I shouldn't say a lot, but they're just not always shown. There are reputable, smart, intelligent people that are speaking out, in media, having these conversations, going, what is going on here? Does this make any sense? And I just think it's good and it's out there, because the masses at public schools, you're right. And that's why a lot of people are, one of the reasons, not the only, are not sending their kids to public schools anymore.
Right.
It's not what it's a different place.
Yeah.
You a couple times, I think you used the word specialize. You don't specialize in that.
Correct.
At Ascent, what do you specialize?
Oh, that's a fair question. Yeah, and I only mean we didn't go through separate trainings and stuff like that. And sometimes when people are looking for a certain type of counseling or therapy, they want to see that. So we're just, open and honest about what we have gotten trained. Most of us have all gotten trained on different types of therapy modalities, cognitive behavioral therapy, I've been trained in dialectical behavioral therapy, acceptance commitment therapy. Sorry, I'm not going to keep going into the therapies. But having also extensive experience with working with like personality disorders, different mood disorders, which you're going to have your bipolar, you're going to have, different type, you're going to have psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. Those are the things that I have specialty. I've worked in treatment centers mainly. This is the first time I'm working in a private practice. And then the other people there have their own experience, but we all kind of collectively, none of us has extensive experience working with, gender identity disorder.
Right.
So
Cool.
One thing that I think we can address as a church and as believers is there seems to be a knee-jerk reaction by Christians when anyone is experiencing gender dysphoria or they're talking about transitioning or anything like that. There seems to be a knee-jerk reaction of responding to that person in a lot of negative ways. Disdain, hatred, anger, bitterness, believing that they are foolish or stupid or that they're somehow culpable for the position that they're in.
mm-hmm.
And I would say that one thing that we can do as believers is stop automatically being so negative to people who are struggling with these different things. Any time that we talk about LGBTQ issues or anything like that, there's always a community of believers that they kind of have this aversion to the topic that turns them, I don't want to use the term toxic because that's
Negative.
but yeah, it's extremely negative, and I don't even think it's hateful. It's just not positive. It's not something that would compel those people to say, "Well, I wonder if they have a legitimate concern." And so, I think one of the things that people can do to help out would be, if you have a kid in your church that's struggling, let's not make an environment that they're afraid to come out and say something that they're struggling to one of their leaders or something. Let's make an environment where they're struggling with a disorder that is related to sin, obviously, and it's the same type of sin that you deal with. Maybe it's a different brand, but we're all struggling. So can we not have an environment where these kids are afraid to come up and talk to somebody about it?
Well, the number one place should be the church.
You would think.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you're saying that. And it sounds like I think your church sounds like a truly welcoming place where people can be themselves. Not that that's who they are, but wherever you are in the moment in your struggle is where you're at, and that they can talk to someone. And that would be the hope. As a therapist, I would hope every church would be the first place someone would go to. Different. Now, I think people equate sometimes being able to go tell somebody something with hearing what they want to hear. And that's not always the case.
That's not always true.
But I think being able to meet them with just, can I just be with you in this struggle? And because I tend to also, when I work with clients or just deal with people in general that are dealing with something that's particularly tough or that there is a lot of fear around, is I don't then come right next to them and go, and you need to do this and you need to do that. I don't do that. I think sometimes somebody just needs to know they're not alone, and you'll sit there with them in that burden.
Yeah.
God
People
calls
don't need
us to
be
do that.
fixed. They need to be loved.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
walk
And
alongside.
held.
Well, it's not within our ability to fix them. Not at all.
Never. It's
Yeah.
not in my ability to fix somebody. No, that's it. Truly, they are with God and with guidance. People they heal. It's pretty remarkable how they can heal.
The Holy Spirit's powerful in dealing with these kind of things. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot, and maybe you can shed some light on as a counselor, is the term narcissism.
Yeah.
It seems like every conversation that you have about counseling these days, the term narcissism comes up. And I'm not necessarily sure that we fully understand what we're saying when we say that. But I think we have an idea of what we want to say. So what would be your definition of narcissism, and what would be some of the things that you would look for, and how? Well, let's start there.
Sure. So it's coming from narcissistic personality disorder. That's the diagnostic term in terms of, something that a disorder someone would carry that would quantify that term. And what it is it's a personality disorder. So it's a pervasive, maladaptive way of behaving and interacting with others. And it has to do with how you see the world and yourself. So someone that is a narcissist or has narcissistic personality disorder, they often do not have much empathy. They're very grandiose. They're very insecure, which is why they are so grandiose. So they're often, going to bolster themselves up and not care too much who they exploit to be able to feel better than other people on a very regular basis in most relationships in their life. They're often very empty, conceited, and they're very hard to be with. And of all the diagnoses, one of the hardest to treat, because they often will not come in for treatment.
Yeah, yeah.
They won't get help. But to be quite honest, I'm not the best at following things online always. I don't know when suddenly being a narcissist became such a hot adjective, to claim for most people. I really don't. But I have noticed a disproportionate amount of clients that come in that will say, my ex was a narcissist, or so-and-so was a narcissist.
I think that people equate narcissism to being self-absorbed or selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And being self-absorbed or selfish is its own thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a narcissist. It just means that you're a human that's self-absorbed and selfish. And I think I like the beginning part of that when you were talking about narcissism, how they are so self-conscious that they elevate themselves to be grandiose. So a true narcissist would be a person that has built up a structure about themselves, and they will maintain that structure at the expense of anyone else around them. Yes. Is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
yes.
So selfishness or self-absorption or, even some manipulative behavior doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you're a narcissist.
No.
But those are all attributes.
True. If you look at being a narcissist, like that's always kind of bugged me because I think of the actual diagnosis and how few people actually fit that diagnosis. But if you are using it as an adjective, some things can be more narcissistic, but that's different than being a true narcissist.
Yeah.
These are very they're I wouldn't say they're a dime a dozen. They're very, I don't have the exact statistics on it, but I've only probably used the diagnosis once. So I don't think it's something that's extremely common, but you're right. Yeah. I think self-centered, I think that there was a lot of opinions about Trump. And I think that when he became big, people started saying he's a narcissist. Whether he is or not, I do not know. But I think that if I can equate it to anything where people really started to talk about narcissists. Oh, and all the Me Too movement, how men are, because it's usually directed at men, and how that became such a big, spreading like wildfire, popular thing to talk about as well.
Yeah, yeah. If Trump's a narcissist, then every politician is a narcissist.
I could see that argument.
Yeah,
I could see that argument.
Is there a difference between a true narcissist and a megalomaniac?
To be quite honest, I don't know. I don't use the term megalomaniac a lot.
I don't hear it very often.
What does that even mean?
I would honestly
I had a
have
boss
to look
who,
it up.
those of us who worked closely with him said, the guy's a megalomaniac. He just has these gigantic plans that place himself at the center of all of that glory and majesty, and was very ruthless about executing it. And
a person who is obsessed with their own power.
Yes.
Mm.
And would flip between being your very best friend or you're an obstacle to be mowed over.
Mm-hmm.
Trample the weak and hurdle the dead to get this to happen.
I see that.
And
That's
so
interesting.
It's just kind of curious as to whether maybe, because I hadn't heard narcissist back then. I, knew the name Narcissus, the myth,
Mm-hmm.
but you didn't hear it back then. But that was used more. I'm just wondering if they're kind of kins or kind of morphed into a more modern understanding of the disorder.
If you track podcasts any at all, when you hear a group of millennials sitting in a room talking and they're talking about like real world issues, the term narcissist comes up a lot.
Does it?
It's like every 12th word is the word narcissist. They think that everyone's a narcissist.
I wonder though if it is somehow tied to that period where I felt like kind of every man was under attack. I don't know. Do you hear it as much towards women?
No, I haven't. I mean,
it depends.
I have seen it.
It depends on who you're talking. Who's talking. There's quite a few podcasts out that have guys on it that are calling out the narcissism of women.
Okay.
And then you have it the other way around. But again, everyone's a narcissist. It's like, and I'm curious as to that might be part of it, but I think it's probably more related to social media.
Yeah.
I think that when we became so self-absorbed that it became very easy for us to assume that we're narcissistic because of our self-absorption.
Yes.
The term selfie in and of itself is a very kind of narcissistic term. But it's maybe narcissistic by trait, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a narcissist. Although social media could be a great platform for a narcissist because you could build yourself up a platform that declares you to be somebody that you are absolutely not.
I can see this in a year that narcissism is no longer a negative; it's a positive.
Well, that would be
I'm a
terrifying
narcissist.
world.
Very terrifying.
Yes.
That would be a
Wouldn't it?
terrifying
The
world.
narcissist party.
Because narcissists can be vile.
It seems like we're on that trajectory.
I don't think that they're receiving it positively, though. It's definitely a what do you call it? A derogatory term.
But I think they're pointing the finger rather than pointing it back at themselves.
Exactly.
Which we would hope they'd have a little more insight to be able to go, well, maybe we got the ball rolling. Because I think your point is astute. Yes. I mean, it's gross when I go on and I can't even tolerate Instagram. I know I should like it, but it's disgusting. Like it is the epitome of self-absorbed, self-obsessed. We could be doing so much for others if we put that energy, any of that energy into doing what we're talking about, making a difference, being there, having good conversations. Like it's just,
Yeah.
it's disheartening.
Instead, we're on Instagram focusing on how many pumpkins we can get on our porch.
Yeah.
My wife follows this lady on Instagram who's like a home interior kind of lady or whatever. And they were talking about this subscription service that they got from this farm. And this farm will come by and for like $500, they'll come by and decorate your front porch with pumpkins and all kinds of other stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, $500 freaking dollars? Are you serious? You imagine what you could do with $500, but you got pumpkins all over your porch. We had a good laugh about it, but man, they even had a package that was like $1,500.
Yikes.
And I love that about North Idaho. Here we laugh about that. We go, are you kidding me? Whereas some of the other places I lived, they'd be all over it.
They'd be like, that's the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
Does that include corn stalks?
Well, I'm sure corn stalks are included. I hope they're included for $500. I better get some corn stalks. My golly. So, have you observed any kind of long-lasting effects from the like post-pandemic era?
Oh yeah, I have.
Like what do you see from that?
Well, I I think it just we have the statistics of suicide rates and everything went up, and it is not going down. It's continuing to go up because I think, like you mentioned, it just set off, pressurized problems that were all there anyway. But you had so much that happened, and all the problems with racism and all the hatred that came up, and that was there, but that really got exploited and blew up, and everyone's scared and anxious. I think anxiety would be one of the things that I have noticed the most that has stayed, especially with kids. Kids having young kids with anxiety. And I do think they're correlated because I know our kids, even if we're not talking to them about what's going on, there was and I don't know about here, you guys, but in California for sure, the whole atmosphere of fear was just terrible. It was everywhere. Everyone was so afraid constantly and would just like this. And the kids felt that. They carried that. And I think they're still carrying some of the trauma.
Yeah, my father-in-law and mother-in-law, they own a place over in Blanchard, and they have access to a pool and hot tub and stuff. And we were over there one day just kind of soaking in the hot tub, and these ladies from Seattle had traveled there. And this was during the end part of the pandemic. And they had traveled to North Idaho because they had heard that it was one of the only communities in the United States that was just completely rejecting any kind of mandates, which is what happened here. We got orders from the governor that we had to do X, Y, or Z. And in typical North Idaho fashion, we were just like, whatever.
Fat chance.
Whatever.
They're so bad.
Come make us. And so they were here because they had to get away from Seattle. It's like every billboard, every commercial, every radio broadcast was just talking about how if you didn't get double vaccinated, you didn't get the mask, or you didn't have the mask on, that you were basically murdering Grandpa Jim. Yep. And they just couldn't take it anymore. They had to get out. And so they took a vacation to come sit in a hot tub in Blanchard, Idaho.
Wow.
Just to get away from all of that.
Sanctuary city.
I mean,
Good for them.
Yeah.
if
I
you've
believe
ever
it.
been to Blanchard, there's nothing there.
No.
And there's a golf course. That's
Although
it.
I hear it's up and coming.
Well,
Stuff
I
is
haven't
coming
seen
to
that, but
Blanchard.
I haven't seen that, but I mean, whatever.
I heard a
But-
lot of stuff recently that's just kind of whoa.
Well, I heard we're getting a Costco, so
Well, look at Ethel for the last
That's what I'm
5 years.
saying.
Good.
It really
gravy.
was. You guys, it was unprecedented. And I don't think I'll ever see anything like it again. Just people with double masks, just yelling at other people for not having double masks.
Yeah.
And just the vaccination anger, and there was just so much anger and hatred. And
on both sides.
yeah, definitely. But I looked it up in terms of the COVID, what has resulted since COVID. And there's 4 areas where it has really increased mental health disorders and an exasperation of mental health disorders. And what they COVID was one of the things that created the exasperation, right? That we're dealing with today. Social media, the isolation and loneliness that came out of the pandemic, and then the lack of access to care. So those 4 areas are all thought to be some of the biggest reasons why we're struggling so bad right now.
And when you say care, you're talking about physical,
Lack of access to mental
medical,
health care.
mental
Health care.
Which is just
Which would be
tragically lacking in the United States of America.
Which seems like
Terribly.
that's our mandate today.
Which is what
to
you
be
guys are
kind of
doing.
at the point of the
right.
spirit of that.
That's
Yeah. Well,
As far as
trying to figure out
accessibility.
what that looks like.
Yeah.
It's hard because there's no precedence for it. And so we're kind of just stumbling around in the dark trying to figure out what that program even looks like.
What would you say is kind of our sandbox as the church as to where, the beginnings of mood disorders, mental health disorders begin to the point where that needs to be handed over to professionals who can take that to the next level, where we should be focusing our efforts at identifying people with issues and encouraging them and trying to help them through the baby steps at the beginning of that?
Yeah,
would you say?
I love that question. I think it's like almost partly screening, but not completely, because we get people that, surprise, don't have any diagnoses that would probably be fine coming to their church. Not everyone has a disorder, you know.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're just working through things. And I think knowing what to look for with some of the symptoms for people, I think that's a big part of it. So you can then, it's almost like screening, like, okay, I think, you know, I think you need a little bit of a higher level, and just explaining what that means. Just people that are more experienced dealing with a couple of the things you mentioned. And then the ones that you're not seeing those markers, working with them.
Yeah. So the screening aspect would be really important then for the church to be able to have some way of screening a person to say, you know, well, there's a potential that you could have a more serious issue than we can deal with. So let me recommend that you go somewhere.
And I think here's what I don't know if you guys are seeing this. We might be seeing different things. When they come into our office, it's usually like, whoa. Most of the time, they have been holding on to this a long time. There's a lot of stuff. And they seem, you know, sometimes it's to the brink of not having a desire to live. Like you could spot that. But I don't know if they wait as long to come to you guys. So if not, you know, catching it earlier is always better. But I don't know. I'm curious. When you have people coming to you, do you go, okay, like you can tell they've been sitting on this for a long time?
No, not necessarily, not as a whole.
Okay.
We have people that, you know, we're not as open. No, that's not the right word. We're not as visible as walking into a clinic someplace, you know, where people may even go up to the door and go, you know, check to see if anybody's watching. I'm going in. Here you can come and be incognito. You know, hey, I want to talk to somebody about something. Sure, come on in. Call so and so, and we'll set you up an appointment. So it's a little bit easier for them, not as open, not as public. I guess would probably be the right word.
Okay, good.
And then, you know, what we're looking at now is taking advantage of the fact that, as I've said earlier, everybody in the church should be a counselor to some degree. Identifying that. And I've had a lot of people come to me and say, hey, so-and-so is looking for someone to talk to about this. Great. Let's do it. Let's talk to them. And so it's very, very low key here. But we do have some intense situations escalate. And we have referred a couple to professionals.
It's been hard to find places to refer people to, honestly.
Send them to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've just started a couple months ago, so I'm not completely full yet. But everything's full. Is that why it's been so hard?
Probably, yeah.
The waiting lists are ridiculous. But
we've had, you know, here we have a professional counselor up in Sandpoint, and you got somebody that really needs to talk to you. It's beyond our capabilities. When can you get her in? 6 months.
It's horrible.
You know, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
No, that's not going to work.
This person may not last 6 months.
Yeah.
So that's when, and here's what I think is also important is I want to go into the churches and provide education to the pastors and to the counselors, the lay people, to give you some information regarding what do we look for when we're screening. Here's the crisis numbers. Here's what we do if no one's available. Because you're right, that isn't acceptable. We got to find somewhere else for him to go.
There definitely needs to be a little bit more integration of information. That seems to be lacking as well. Churches are notoriously lacking in communication with one another already.
Okay.
And if you couple that with counseling, you know, good luck trying to get churches to communicate with counseling communities. So, you know, there is a severe deficiency in the networking with all of that.
There's one more. I didn't mention this. There's another issue that you guys probably know about that is extremely pressing and dangerous, and that's opioid crisis. I've always worked in treatment centers, but the last one I worked in was an outpatient one in the area. The fentanyl crisis is so bad. People are dying constantly in outpatient treatment, in inpatient treatment. And there's a lot of stigma around that too, to getting help. And so I don't know if you guys deal with that at all. We don't deal with it a ton at our clinic, but in general, it's one of the ones that is really up there in terms of the dangers and how deadly it is.
I don't think we've had any instances
Great.
at this point.
Good.
I haven't seen any, but that doesn't mean that they're not there.
Yeah.
We
And
probably have a few cases of prescription opiate abuse,
oh, for sure.
painkillers,
Mhm.
Yeah.
because people here in this rural environment, they hurt themselves.
Mhm.
And pain is difficult to deal with. But that can be easily abused.
And that's that. Yeah, that is part of the opioid use disorder. A lot of people, it is prescription. But what happens when they run out of their pills and they can't get another prescription, they're going for other things. And often that's laced with fentanyl. And that's why people are just dying. So I know it seems like it might not happen to us, but it is happening like crazy.
Well, yeah, I
This
was going to
area.
say, I mean,
Everywhere.
fentanyl is everywhere right now, and it's something to be watching out for sure. So, yeah, I can see that definitely being an issue.
Just add another thing to the pot.
Well, I mean, we didn't really have enough to think about. So.
No, we did not.
Well, we kind of come up against it. Greg, you got any final thoughts?
Just the fact that with Lisa coming on board and kind of taking control of our counseling, she's already got some inroads to a church over in Spokane that actually has, I think it's ACBC training, American Association or Christian Biblical Counseling or something like that. And so we're looking at firing that up and getting some more people involved. But it's great to have Ascent in the neighborhood. And yes, we will start referring people over to you. Starting with an A, you'll be at the top of the list. Since there's
That was smart.
nobody.
Well, we'd
So-
love to have them.
Yeah, and just thank you. This is a stigma that we need to overcome in the church, and the more light we can bring to it, the better. So thank you for what you're doing, and welcome to the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This was a pleasure, and I always love talking about this. I get a little nerdy.
Yeah.
So
No, that's all right.
thanks
We
for
like nerds.
listening.
Ken, do you have any final thoughts?
Don't have a lot today. I mean, I'm just I'm excited that you're able to come onto the show. This has really been great, and I'm excited to see not just our church, but the Big C Church get much better at this, of being a first aid station for people dealing with whatever the issues are. We know this world's not going to get a whole lot better anytime soon. The temperature on the pressure cooker is just going to keep ratcheting up. We've got an election year coming up, so all of the problems are going to become the thing.
Yep.
And, the mental disorder du jour is going to be something beyond this.
No, they're already pumping it out. They're
Yeah.
already pumping out the fear. I just saw a thing with Hillary Clinton the other day where she was talking about how
Oh, my gosh.
there was going to be election interference, and we're like a year away.
Yeah.
And that's already starting. And so if it's already starting, I can't even imagine what it's going to be like come August. People are just going to be in a frenzy again. It's just brace yourselves for impact, for sure.
So if there's any pastors listening to this or any lay leaders in your churches, see what you can do. See what you can form together. Educate yourselves. Get informed on the issues that people are dealing with in your community. Form a ministry to help them. Just help love them through it. Help love them into the right direction to get what they need. We need to be ministering to these people, and they're right there in the pews right in front of us. Let's not let this fall under our radar. Let's do something about it.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Courtney, did you have any final thoughts?
Oh, no, it's been great being here. I hope that if anyone is struggling with a mental health disorder, that maybe one thing they could have gotten out of this is not to blame themselves, and maybe just to lay aside right now any feelings of guilt or shame and just kind of look at it in a factual way. We all get unwell sometimes in our minds, sometimes in our stomachs, sometimes in our heads, sometimes everywhere. So it's just something to follow up with and to be gentle with yourself.
Amen. Amen.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had any one thing to say, I think I would just speak pastor to pastor for a moment. There are a lot of pastors out there that are fairly dismissive of mental health issues and the things that people are dealing with. And I would remind them that mental health issue is really just a remnant of sin. It really is sinfulness in the body that we're dealing with. And, you know, it's not unlike cancer or unlike any other kind of malady that we get because of the sinfulness of our world. You know, it's all decaying around us, and we have to remember that, you know, we can't solve everything by preaching hell out of people. It just doesn't work sometimes. And I think people, particularly pastors, like to think of Jude 123, you know, others save with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment spotted with the flesh. They like to talk about that part, but they forget about the part before that where it says, and of some have compassion, making a difference. And I would say in equal measure, make sure that you're remembering compassion, because these people, they're not choosing to be this way. It's not like they wake up in the morning and say, you know, I think I'm going to have ADHD today. It's not the way it works. And so, you know, I would say that, you know, if you know someone that you love that is suffering from anxiety, fear, depression, panic attacks, mood swings, eating or personality disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychotic episodes, talk to a medical doctor, get an evaluation, refer them to a mental health professional in their area at the very least. Contact your pastor and talk to your church about counseling and other support that may be available to you, and let them help you walk through it with faith and hope and love, you know, and understand that you're not alone. You're not the only person dealing with it, and you're not the only person that is aware. And there's a lot of people that actually really, truly care. If you know someone that's having suicidal thoughts, you can call or text 988 at any time to talk to a trained professional who can help you through that. And if you are within the sound of this of our podcast and you're struggling with any of this stuff, come and let us know. We are very discreet. Nobody has to know what's going on. We can talk with you. We can help you find the help that you need. And so I would encourage people to do that, and start working together to knock some of this stuff out, right?
Yeah. Amen.
Thank you.
Yeah. That about does it for us today. As always, thank you for joining us. If you have a comment or a question, you can leave it on our website or on our email at 3p@athelbaptistchurch.org. Ken will answer that.
Absolutely.
And if your idea gets used on a show, you will be the proud recipient of a official 3P coffee mug.
Mm-hmm.
Exciting stuff.
Shiny.
Yes. Makes your coffee taste better. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks again to Athel Baptist Church and its members for generous support of this ministry. And again, thank you for listening. And until next time, remember the Great Commission. Go into all the world, reach the lost with the gospel, and build disciples who can do the same. And with that, we are out.